Hey everyone, and welcome back to Ideanthro Movement. On today's episode, we are going to be talking about how our concept of the importance of huge variety in our movement practice, in our training, because that's what we're talking about all week, but how that concept of wide and necessary variety fits with the traditional strength and conditioning industry's concept of benchmarks of appropriate strength in lifts like squats or deadlifts. So if you hang around the strength and conditioning world a little bit, you'll hear at times, you come across resources at times that try and set these benchmarks of, if you're a functional such and such person, such and such demographic and age group or sex or whatever, then you should be able to, if you're healthy and appropriately functional, do a squat that is X 1.5 times your body weight, say is good. Really good double body weight back squat's really quite exceptional, unless you're a trained power lifter, for example. But there are these benchmarks, you should be able to, there's this percentage of your body weight, you should be able to squat that percentage of body weight, you should be able to bench press that percentage of your body weight. How do benchmarks like that fit with or differ from an approach to movement that is based around huge variety? The answer to this lies in the fact that we would argue that overdevelopment in any particular narrow measure doesn't give a particularly good indication of people's ability to perform movement in the real world. It's actually far more useful to be reasonably capable in a whole wide array of different movements than it is to meet any particular benchmarks in some linear structured in the gym type movements like a squat or a deadlift or a bench press. Further to that, you will find that someone who develops really good, for example, movement capacity in a wide variety of different lower body type movements, different ways of getting around close to the ground, different climbing techniques, different squatting techniques, right? Someone who develops a really solid, wide ability in a whole bunch of those will probably have a really good back squat when measured, assuming there's not some other link up the chain, like they're all legs and literally no torso to support the weight because it's on their back. But just bear with me there. Just bear with me here. Someone who has a really wide movement practice will typically then do quite well on these linear tests. But it doesn't work the other way. A specialist who trains only for those special situations doesn't tend to then automatically be able to move really well in a wide variety of contexts, the type of movements that we see and require in the real world. If you want tangible examples of this, let's look at the following. Look at a power lifter who tries to do any sort of athletic endeavor. They, unless they are already training really broadly, typically don't transfer across very well at all. Another example of this that's even a little bit more scary is CrossFitters. If you ever watched the CrossFit Games, you'll see something happen. So CrossFit has this thing that it's meant to prepare you for the huge variety of things that you could come across in the real world. And yet we see this situation where CrossFitters in the CrossFit Games, so the top of the CrossFit world, have in the past been thrown things like obstacle courses. And they come along to do those obstacle courses, and some do quite okay. But others look like absolute total fish out of water because they have no experience in the breadth. They've got very, very good within the limited CrossFit universe. Yeah, sure, it's wider. It's a wider universe than the bodybuilding universe. It's a wider universe than the traditional gym universe. But compared to natural human movement, it's narrow as. And so unless that CrossFitter also happens to have a broad, wide base of varied movement, they then get crushed by anything like an obstacle course that actually requires them to move rather than just do exercises. This all again comes back to the said principle. We get good at what we do and not at what we don't. And so if we want to be able to perform in the real world, which requires varied movements of us, even if the modern world requires less than the world that our ancestors evolved to exist in, if we want to perform well in the real world, then we need to have trained a wide variety of movement. And it just so happens that if we have trained widely, we will probably still be reasonable. Nowhere near the best in the world. I'm not saying that a generalist mover is going to suddenly win a powerlifting title. That's not the point here. But my point here is that a generalist mover will probably do well on isolated tests of movement. So coming back to this concept that's in the strength and conditioning world of, oh, you should have a such and such weight bench press and a such and such weight squat to be healthy. Fine, that's all good. But the problem is you can get those measures by doing only bench and squat and deadlift, but those don't necessarily transfer over to actually being good and healthy and moving in the real world. Or you can move like you move in the real world and you probably actually do okay on those tests, right? You want a really good, solid base. Just to deviate just for one really quick moment though, this actually ties in really, really, really well with research into, now I've heard this specifically for golf, but also this does apply more broadly than that, but I've had a specific paper quoted at me before. There's this thought in the world that you look at people like Floyd Mayweather, Tiger Woods, people who were groomed by a young age to be very, very, very good at sports. As it turns out, they're the exception and not the rule. We tend to think about these people who were introduced to such and such a sport when they were really young and groomed to be great at it, and they became absolutely awesome and dominated the world. The reality is, though, that they're the exception to the rule. Most people who get really, really, really good at a sport had a really broad movement or sporting base right through their younger years and only specialised somewhere maybe around the middle teenage years, right? So what I'm saying here is backed up in even the high performance sporting context, which is to say you need a solid movement base, and a solid movement base can get you a fair way and to show potential in a whole bunch of specialized degrees. And then if you want to take one of those and pursue one of those to a much higher and broader standard, by all means you can, but it doesn't work the other way, or it very, very rarely works that specializing early even gets you particularly good at the highest levels of that specialized feat, and it definitely doesn't get you good as a generalized mover. Okie dokie, that is plenty for this episode, talking about why variety is such an important component of our approach to movement at Ideanthro Movement. If you would like to know more about what we do at Ideanthro Movement, you can find us at ideanthro.com/movement, find out details about our facility in Oxley, Brisbane, Australia. You can also get in touch if you want to ask questions, find out about the facility, book in for a free trial, any of that sort of stuff. You can find us at ideanthro.com/connect. Okie dokie, thank you for tuning in. We really appreciate it. If you like this video, give us a like or a subscribe or appropriate equivalent button on whatever social network you are watching. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you next time.